Hey, tonight's message, if you're taking notes, you can entitle this message, Favor Where I'm Found. Favor where I'm found. Everyone say favor where I'm found. Have you ever found yourself saying these two statements? If I just had fill in the blank, then things would be better. You ever found yourself saying that before? Show of hands if you've ever said that in your life. All of us should be raising our hands because it's true for all of us. How about this one? If I just wasn't dealing with this, then life would be great. You ever been there before? I know I've been there plenty of times, and here's the thing. If you have, you're in really good company because it seems that this thing that we deal with, it's just part of the human condition. I would argue that those two phrases and statements, they stem from the human experience. Who we are as human beings, we tend to drift that way. If I just had this, then things would be better. If I just wasn't dealing with this, then life would be great. It seems that this is just part of being human. We see current circumstance, hear me, we see current circumstance and current well-being as being one and the same. So follow me for a minute. Meaning when my season is good, I'm good. Are you following me for a minute? Follow me for a second. When my season is good, then I'm good. When my day is going well, I'm doing well. Are you following me? When I'm getting A's in school, it is well with my soul. When my parents aren't arguing at home, then I'm good. But when any of that gets disrupted, my well-being gets disrupted with it. It seems that this is just the human condition. This is part of the human experience, that we attach our current circumstance to our current well-being. Those two become one. That if externally my situation looks this way, then internally my reality is that way as well. When I don't like my season, I'm dissatisfied. When I don't like where I'm currently at, on the inside, I'm dissatisfied. When I have a tough day, it is not well with my soul. When I get a bad grade, my world has crumbled with it. Are you following me for a moment? This seems to be the human condition. And I know that for all of us, at one point in our lives or another, we've dealt with this same thing. It seems to plague us as human beings that our circumstance determines our well-being. Are you following me tonight? Our circumstance seems to determine how well or not well we're really doing. When my parents are arguing, I'm not well either. And I'm not saying that your situation or your circumstance isn't real, because I know that it is, and you know that it is. You live with it. You face it every day. Some of you might face it every morning that you wake up. So I'm not saying for one moment that your circumstance is not real, but I want to encourage you with this. God never called us to live subject to our circumstances. God never called you or me to live subject to my circumstances. My circumstances are not tied to my well-being. What's happening on the outside doesn't have permission or authority to determine what's also happening on the inside. Are you following me for a minute? What's happening around you should not have the authority or the power to determine what's going on the inside of you. My circumstance doesn't have the authority or permission to determine my well-being. Can you imagine if Jesus' well-being was tied to his current circumstance? Let's go on a journey for a minute, my friends. Can you imagine if Jesus' well-being was connected to his current circumstance? That if when things weren't going well for Jesus, he wasn't doing well either. If he allowed his circumstance, if he allowed his situation, if he allowed what was going on the outside to fully affect how he was doing on the inside, let's just go on a journey for a minute. From the age of 30 to the age of 33, when he was crucified, beaten, ridiculed, and mocked before going to the cross, let's just go on a journey of his everyday. What happened with the religious leaders? He was mocked, ridiculed, spit on, told he was a liar every single day. There really wasn't a place that Jesus went where he didn't experience confrontation or opposition. To be truthful, most of us would not be able to deal with the external circumstances that Jesus did when he walked this earth. We would have thrown in the towel a long time ago. So can you imagine if Jesus really allowed his external circumstances to determine his internal well-being? He probably wouldn't have made it to the cross, which means that humanity would have never made it to heaven because he would have never made it to the cross. Jesus, he did not allow his external circumstances to determine his internal well-being. I would argue that this is one of the plagues of our existence, is that we so often tie our circumstance and what's going on around us to how we're doing on the inside. If it were that case, Jesus would have had 0 good days if he really tied his external circumstances to his internal well-being. But Jesus didn't allow his circumstances to phase him. Someone that modeled this attitude and spirit better than most was a guy named Joseph in the Old Testament. Joseph modeled this better than many and most, and we're gonna look at the story of his life tonight. I wanna take you on a journey through the roller coaster ride that was Joseph's life. I'm gonna describe his story in 5 parts. We're not gonna read the whole story, but can I encourage you to go back and read it for yourself at some point here soon? Part 1, Joseph had a dream. You can write that down if you're taking notes. Part 1 of Joseph's story, Joseph had a dream. Joseph's story begins in Genesis 37, and at this point, Joseph was 17 years old already. So we don't know anything before he was 17 years old, but what we do know is that at 17, this is where the story begins for him. How many of you are 17 in the room tonight? 17-year-olds. Nice. 18-year-olds? Awesome. 14-year-olds, since we're going there? 15-year-olds? 16-year-olds. Wow, it's like very diverse. That's great. It's like even all across the board. Did you know that you don't have to wait until you're in your 20s to start living for God? You don't have to wait until you're in your 30s to have a story worth telling. You don't have to wait until you're an adult with money to start having a story to tell. Can I tell you, you have a story to tell right now. And God is writing your story in your 14-year, 15-year, 16-year, 17-year-old season of your life. God is writing your story. He's writing your story right now. And at the age of 17, this is where we pick up in Joseph's story. Joseph has a God dream. He was the youngest of 12 sons. He had 11 brothers. Most of them were his half-brothers. He tells this dream that he had to his brothers, and ultimately they end up despising him for it. Here's how the dream went. So to put it really simply, Joseph has a dream, and in that dream, the interpretation is that Joseph is gonna have dominion and rule over his brothers. Now, here's what you need to understand about Joseph. He is the youngest in his family, but the Bible says that in that dream that he got from God, he was gonna have rule and dominion over his older brothers, which in that current climate of culture was unheard of, didn't happen. And Joseph, naively, I think he told the story the wrong way. When you read the Bible, he just kind of says it straight up like, hey brothers, I had this dream. Let me tell you about it. You guys are gonna get real excited when I tell you. Basically, you're gonna serve me. Isn't that great news? It's like, Joseph, get it packaged out a little differently. If I were your brother, I wouldn't like you either, because I didn't hear that from God. But Joseph, he has this God dream. That would really make family meals a little rough, wouldn't they? I mean, I feel like the dinner table probably got a little awkward for a while. Part 2, Joseph is sold into slavery. He's sold into slavery. So here's what happened. The brothers were really disgruntled with Joseph's dream, and they were frustrated by Joseph. And they were so disgruntled that they determined to kill him. However, one of the brothers, his name was Reuben, he suggested they don't kill him. Instead, he suggested they throw him into a deep reservoir, a cistern, where they would typically store water. So basically a cistern was just this massive like pit that you would store water in at that time. And so Reuben, he's the only brother that's like, this isn't good. They want to kill Joseph, but I'm gonna offer a different solution. And really what he was doing the whole time is he was trying to save Joseph. So he offers this proposal. He says, hey, instead of killing him, let's just throw him into the cistern so that his blood's not on our hands. He can just die there, but his blood won't be on our hands. In the back of his mind, he was really gonna go back after they left and rescue his brother. But Judah, one of the other brothers, had a good idea. He said, why would we let him die here? Let's just sell him instead so we can actually make some money off of him. Great brothers, right? Some of you are like, I'd love to sell my sibling. Don't look at your sibling. That's mean, don't do that. So they sell him into slavery, and then Reuben comes back later only to find Joseph isn't there anymore. Reuben came back for Joseph, but he was already sold. Reuben might have been the only reason Joseph stayed alive. Let's just think about this story for a moment, because the story of Joseph is profound and kind of epic. By the time that we get to the end, you're gonna be like, wow, that's a really cool story. But Reuben might be the only reason he's alive. Think about that for a minute. Had he not stepped in for just a second and said, hey, I'm offering a different solution. Maybe we don't kill him. Maybe we just leave him here and let him die on his own. He might be the only reason why Joseph lives to walk out his story. Though it may have been hard to see at the moment, Joseph still had people that were for him. I want you to catch this for a minute, because this story, he's got 10 brothers that are clearly against him at the beginning, but he's got one that's for him. And here's what I think we need to learn from this. We need to learn to focus less on those that are against us and lean more on those that are for us. So many of us spend so much time thinking about the people in our life that are against us that we forget the people that have been for us the whole time. Oh, we spend so much time obsessing over the critics, obsessing over the mockers and the naysayers in our life. But if we would just take a moment to recognize that there's still 1, 2, maybe even 3 that have had our back from the beginning, that are gonna cheer us on in our faith, that are gonna rally us forward and champion us to go after all that God has for us. We spend so much time looking at and obsessing over the people who are against us that we forget who's been for us the whole time. And I'm not just talking about people. If God is for me, whosoever shall be against me. You got somebody who's for you. I don't care who's against you. And maybe the encouragement for some of us tonight is we got to focus way less on the people that are against us, have something to say about us. Maybe we should spend way more time focusing on the people that have always been for us. Maybe you need to take a little bit more time to observe and inspect the people that have been there for you through thick and thin, through every tough season, every valley. Because whether you can find 1, 2, 5, or 10, I promise you that you have at least one in your life that has never given up on you, never let you quit. And you know what? All you need is a few. All you need is a few. You don't need an army or a village to believe God with you or have your back. All we really need is a few. All we really need is one. And we serve one who is for us and not against us. But beyond the one who is for us and not against us, can I encourage you, my friend? We all have at least 1, 2, maybe 3, maybe more people that we can say with certainty have been in our back, had our back, been in our corner, celebrating us, cheering us on in our journey. And we need to take more time to inspect and evaluate who are those people in our life, instead of constantly focusing on the people that have been naysayers or standing in opposition to us. Let's focus on the people who are for us. Can I encourage you, my friend? You got people that are for you. And they might just be in this room right now. Part 3, Joseph finds favor in his slavery. So now we're gonna see the tide turn for a moment. Part 3, Joseph finds favor in his slavery. Did you write that correctly, Austin? He finds favor in his slavery? Are you sure about that? I'm sure about it. I'll read it to you. Genesis 39, 2-4 says, the Lord was with Joseph. Pause. The Lord was with Joseph. Sometimes you just need to remind yourself that the Lord is with you. And if he is with you and he is for you, whosoever shall be against you. The Lord was with Joseph. So he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. This pleased Potiphar, so he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. Joseph sees the favor of God while he's a slave. His circumstance did not determine his well-being. Are you following me? His circumstance did not determine his well-being. I don't know if you're really understanding the significance of this story. Joseph was in slavery. So he had to do whatever the slave owner commanded, whatever his master said he had to do. He was in slavery, and he found favor in the eyes of his master. Why? Because he was not moved by his circumstance alone. He was not moved by what was going on the outside. I don't know what's going on the outside in your life, but is it affecting what's going on the inside? What was happening on the outside in Joseph's life did not affect or impact what was going on the inside. He may have been in slavery, but he found favor in the eyes of the master because his God was with him, because his God had never forsaken him. However, while he was there, Potiphar's wife started to take a liking to Joseph. She kept trying to get Joseph to sleep with her. So the entire time Joseph's here, he is serving well. He's being entrusted with many responsibilities. Potiphar, the slave owner, his master, is giving him much to work with. He's given him responsibility. He's giving him influence. Joseph is prospering in slavery. He's prospering. And Potiphar's wife consistently, time and time again, just kept coming back to Joseph and saying, sleep with me, sleep with me. And every time, Joseph resisted. He resisted. He refused to allow his convictions to be compromised despite what his circumstance looked like. No matter what your circumstance looks like today, my friend, may it not cost you compromising your convictions just because of your current circumstance. Joseph vowed that regardless of what I'm walking through, I will not compromise. I will not give up on what I know is right. I will not stop in doing good. Galatians 6:9, for at the proper time I will reap a harvest if I don't quit. I'm not gonna grow weary in doing good. I'm not gonna grow weary in doing what's right. I'm not gonna grow weary in doing what's right in the eyes of God. I'm gonna keep living the way He called me to live. I'm gonna live upright in His eyes. I'm not gonna quit just because of my current circumstance. You know how easy it would have been for Joseph to just count his losses and say, whatever, I mean, what's it gonna matter? Look at my life, from the pit to slavery. But he didn't allow his current circumstance to compromise his convictions. Eventually, she physically grabs him to try and get him to sleep with her. So she grabs him. And he resisted again, so much so that he ran away from her so quickly that his clothes tore in her hands. So my man did not entertain the idea for a minute. Catch the integrity of Joseph right here. He couldn't control what happened to him. He could control his response. And he controlled his response. He didn't just kind of nudge her away and say, no. He didn't just kind of tap her hand away and say, no. My man put his running shoes on. If he was wearing Crocs, he threw them in sport mode and he took off. So quickly that his clothes ripped in her hands. We cannot entertain sin. If we entertain sin in our life, eventually it'll stain our life. We can't entertain it. He didn't entertain it for a moment. He didn't give it a second thought. The moment that she grabbed his shirt, he turned around and ran. Can I encourage you? There are battles in your life you need to face, and there are other things you just need to run away from. The sin in your life, just run away from it. Don't even give it a second thought. Don't give the enemy an inch because he wants to take a mile in your life. For the favor of God to live in my life, I need to put compromise to death. For the favor of God to live in my life, I need to put compromise to death. Because I want the favor of God to live in my life. But don't be deceived by this story, my friend. Joseph did not experience favor just because he was there. Joseph didn't experience favor just because he was there long enough or he was around for a little bit. He experienced the favor of God because he refused to compromise his convictions. He experienced the favor of God because he didn't allow his current circumstance to determine his convictions. He experienced the favor of God because what was going on the outside didn't determine who he was on the inside. Can I encourage some of you tonight? No matter what's going on around you, do not allow what's happening to you to determine what's happening in you. Don't allow what's happening around you to determine what's happening in you. What's happening on the outside doesn't have permission to contaminate what God is doing on the inside. Part 4, Joseph finds favor in prison. So here's what happened in the story. Joseph, he ran. But Potiphar's wife goes back to Potiphar and she says, you'll never believe what happened. Joseph was trying to sleep with me. Hold on. Are you kidding me? So she paints this narrative for Potiphar. False narrative, not true. She paints a false narrative of Joseph. And she says, Joseph was trying to sleep with me. Potiphar believed her. Potiphar believed her. And so he throws Joseph in prison. Here's what it says in Genesis 39, 20 through 23. So he took Joseph and threw him into prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. But the Lord was with Joseph. Everyone say, the Lord was with Joseph. Now say, the Lord is with me. I don't care what you're walking through. I care. But it does not matter what you're walking through. It doesn't matter what you're facing. He is with you, my friend. He's with you. Are you catching the thread? Are you catching the theme of this story right now? It didn't matter where Joseph went. It didn't matter what his circumstance was. It didn't matter what battle he was facing. The Lord was with him. And it doesn't matter what you're facing, my friend. The Lord is with you. The Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. At this point, the scenery of Joseph's life has not gotten any better. The scenery, the landscape of Joseph's life has not gotten any better. Can we just be real for a minute? Can we put ourselves in the story? If you were thrown into a pit by your family, sold into slavery, did really well there until somebody shamed your name and told a lie about you. And now you're in prison for things you didn't deserve. How would you really feel? I think I'd feel like a victim, if I can be really honest with you. I'd feel like a victim. I'd feel like I'm just on the wrong side of everyone else's poor decisions. I'd feel like everything in my life I didn't deserve wasn't warranted, which to be honest with you, can I encourage you? Some of the things in your life, they weren't warranted. It's not fair, and I'm sorry. But we have to look at the landscape of Joseph's life for a minute. He really didn't deserve anything up to this point, but the climate and the landscape have not changed. He went from the pit to slavery to prison. But at the age of 17, he clearly decided that no matter what's going on around me, it's not gonna change who I am on the inside. Did you know that you don't have to fall victim to the climate of your world or what your friends are doing at school? You can rise above. You can stand out. And you don't have to wait until you're in your 20s and your 30s to do it. The climate has not changed. But everything Joseph touches seems to get better. Was it difficult? I'm sure it was. But one thing we know for certain, he didn't allow his current circumstance to determine his well-being. This is the theme and this is the thread of his whole existence. Even though hell has broken loose around me, I still have heaven on the inside of me. Some of you need to realize, even though hell may have broken loose around you, you still have heaven on the inside of you. And if I got heaven on the inside of me, hell can be breaking loose all around me. It's not gonna change who I know I am. My circumstance doesn't get to determine my joy. Doesn't get to rob me of my peace. No. He gives me peace. He gives me joy. I know who I am in him. And the joy of the Lord is my strength, my friend. So he has walked through hell. The climate and the landscape has not changed. He's still walking through hell. Genesis 45-9 says, while they were in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they both looked upset. Why do you look so worried today? He asked them. And they replied, we both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean. Interpreting dreams, catch this, interpreting dreams is God's business. Interpreting dreams is God's business. Joseph replied, go ahead and tell me your dreams. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream first. The story goes on to say that he interpreted their dreams perfectly. Now, who interpreted them? The Lord, but he used Joseph. So what do we figure out about Joseph right here, right now? A life surrendered is a life of favor. And if you want the favor of God to follow you, you better live your life surrendered to him. Joseph interprets the dream, but he's simply telling them what the Lord is giving him. He's just the vessel. He recognizes something. Joseph gets it. He understands that he's just an empty vessel and an empty temple for God to use. He doesn't take the credit. He doesn't boost his ego by saying, I can interpret your dream. No, he says only God can interpret your dream. But Lord, use me however you want to use me. My life is surrendered to you. Use me however you want to. My answer is yes. And he uses Joseph to interpret both of their dreams correctly. A life surrendered is a life of favor. So he interprets their dreams perfectly. Everything he said was going to happen, happened. He does a great service to these two men. But then he asks the chief cupbearer to just mention him to the king so that he can get out of prison. Here's what the Bible says. That's all he asked for. Did a great service for them. He says, just mention me. I want to get out of prison, to be honest. Just mention my name. And here's what it says. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. You ever feel overlooked, forgotten about? I can't even imagine how overlooked and forgotten about Joseph had to have felt in this moment. I'm doing all the right things, but my circumstance still hasn't changed. Genesis 41:1. One verse later, so the chapter changes, but this is the next verse. 2 full years later. So from the moment that he's forgotten about, fast forward 2 years. 2 years Joseph spends in prison. 2 more years on top of how much time he'd already spent there. 2 more years, just because he forgot about him. 2 full years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. So now, Pharaoh has a dream. He's the ruler over the entire kingdom. He has a dream, and what happens? Pharaoh starts to tell the chief cupbearer about this dream, and in that moment, he remembers, oh my gosh, there's this guy named Joseph in prison, and he interpreted my dream. And I completely forgot about him. You need to go and find him because he'll be able to interpret your dream. And now, Joseph gets an opportunity to stand before the king and interpret his dream for him, just like he did the other 2 men. What I've discovered is that though the promise of God may seem delayed, he always delivers. Though the promise of God may seem delayed in your life, God's never late, he's never early, he's always on time. And I'll tell you what, my friend, in that amount of time that Joseph spent in prison, here's what we know about his time in prison. Genesis 41, 37 through 40, Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? Here's what we know about Joseph. We don't know a lot about those 2 years. What we can assume is that he wouldn't have come out of those 2 years filled with the Spirit of God if he didn't spend time to be with God. So what was Joseph doing in those 2 years? He was working his waiting. He was waiting, but while he was waiting, he was working. Can I encourage you tonight, my friend? You need to be working while you're waiting. Keep spending time with God. Keep doing the things you know to do. Even if you're not seeing the breakthrough you've been looking for, keep doing the simple things and the small things that you know to do. Keep doing the simple things. Keep doing the small things that you know to do. Because though the promise of God may seem delayed, he always delivers at just the right time. Part 5, this is the last part. We're closing up. Part 5, the dream fulfilled. Joseph made ruler of Egypt. So Joseph, again, rightly interprets another dream. The Spirit of God uses him. The Lord empowers him to share this dream, interpret this dream correctly. And what does it lead to? Leads to this. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of these dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours. So Joseph makes it. Through all of the turmoil, through all the difficulty, he finally arrives. But catch this, my friend, that was years in the making. Years of not allowing his circumstance to determine who he was on the inside. Years of not allowing his circumstance to determine his personal well-being. Years of not allowing external things to determine internal things. Years of fighting the good fight. Here's the theme of Joseph's story. The favor of God doesn't fall on better soil. The favor of God falls where I'm found. Wherever you are tonight, my friend, that's where the favor of God can be found in your life. You don't need a bigger or a better opportunity. Long before Joseph was ever handed the keys to the kingdom, he was a faithful slave and a faithful prisoner. You don't need a change of scenery. Joseph found himself in pits and prisons, but he was faithful where he was. You don't need a different school. I've watched single students make a monumental impact right where they are. You don't need to chase after the idea of becoming something. You don't need a different family. Joseph was wanted to be killed by his own, but settled on selling him into slavery. All you need, my friend, is what you've been given. No matter where Joseph went, he found favor. No matter where he was, he found favor. No matter what he was facing, he found favor. No matter the circumstance on the outside for Joseph, he found favor. No matter where you are tonight, you can find favor. No matter what you're facing, you can find favor. No matter what your current circumstance is, hopefully this encourages you tonight. You can find favor with God no matter what's going on the outside of your life. You can find favor. You don't have to be a victim to your current circumstance. You can find favor with God right where you are. You can find favor with him. I'm gonna invite you guys to close your eyes and bow your heads. I wanna pray over you. Lord, thank you for these moments that we get to share in your presence. God, thank you for the challenge that we find in your word tonight. Lord, we're grateful for the opportunity that we've had to simply gather in your name. And God, we're grateful that as your word went forth tonight, God, you spoke to us. Lord, maybe you rearranged some thought processes or ideals in our heart. Maybe you gave us revelation through your word tonight. No matter where we are, God, we're thankful that we're not where we were at the beginning of the night. God, thank you that you met us tonight. Thank you that you convicted us tonight. Lord, whatever changes we need to make leaving here, Lord, we invite you to help us to make those changes and corrections in our life tonight. God, we're thankful for the power of your Spirit, that no matter what's going on around us, we can find favor with you who dwells in us. God, even if we're facing hell on the outside, thank you that we have heaven on the inside.